Trigun is set on a barren planet where the human race has been forced to restart its civilization after destroying Earth. Having lost most of their previous technological knowledge, the people stranded on planet Gunsmoke have found themselves living in an Old West-style society in which criminal gangs and ruthless bounty hunters fight each other for profit. In a world where violence runs rampant, we are introduced to our unusual protagonist, Vash the Stampede, an infamous gunman and outlaw who, as it turns out, is actually a committed pacifist and idealist that strives to create a world without conflict. Throughout the series, Vash always tries to solve conflicts by non-violent means, and even when that's not possible, he chooses to incapacitate his opponents rather than killing them. In the first part of the series, Vash manages to adhere to his morals by concealing his real power and attributing his success to dumb luck instead. That, however, quickly changes when we are introduced to the antagonists of the show, Vash's brother Knives and his right-hand man Legato. In stark contrast with Vash's ideals, Knives and Legato feel a visceral hatred for mankind and seek to exterminate humanity to rid the world of their brutality. The conflict between Vash and Knives is the key component that drives Trigun's narrative forward, as they represent the thesis and antithesis of the show. Two ideological extremes that are irreconcilable with each other. The origin of the ideological divide between Vash and Knives is shown in episode 17, where we first learn about their childhood. Even though the two brothers look human, it turns out they are actually plants, advanced life forms that humans use to power their technology. Vash and Knives grow up much faster than normal children, and early on show superhuman intelligence, endurance, and skill. The crew of the spaceship they grow up on shows affection for them, but they also can't help but feel a certain degree of fear because of their superior abilities. However, there is one person that shows them overwhelming love, Ram, their caretaker and mother figure. Vash's infinite compassion for humans and all living things in general stems from Ram's teachings. And more than a century after her death, he is determined to keep her ideals alive, which is represented by his red coat, an homage to Ram's favorite flower, the geranium. Knives, on the other hand, focuses his attention on the ugly side of humanity and comes to see them as a menace. It is their fault that Earth was destroyed and that plants were being exploited for their power. The conflicting worldview of the two brothers is best exemplified in an iconic scene in which Vash and Knives notice a butterfly that is about to be eaten by a spider. Vash watches the scene in distress and tries to think of a way to help both of them, while Knives takes immediate action and crushes the spider to save the butterfly. As Knives states in episode 26, he sees humanity as spiders that prey on his race, and therefore they must be eliminated. It is here that we come across an interesting question that Trigun proposes. What does it mean to have power, and how should one use it? Vash and Knives are essentially gods compared to humans. They are superior to them in every way, be it physically or intellectually. As a superior being, Knives takes it upon himself to judge humans for their sins, while Vash chooses to live among them as an equal, hiding his power, as it is seen in the early episodes of the show. Ironically enough, Vash is a committed pacifist, but uses a gun that Knives made for him as his weapon of choice to bring about peace. A metaphor that perfectly represents the real power that he possesses and his hesitation to use it to its fullest extent. Even though his commitment to non-violence and self-sacrifice is laudable, it ends up carrying dire consequences for our protagonist and the people around him. Vash's reluctance to quickly deal with his opponents leads to a severe mutilation of his own body and the destruction of multiple cities. During the events leading up to the main plot of Trigun, Vash ends up shooting Knives twice, but doesn't finish him off afterwards, as that would go against Ram's teachings, and in his mind would make him the same as Knives. However, Vash's unwillingness to deal with his brother ultimately ends up bringing only more death and destruction when Knives eventually sends Legato and the gung-ho guns against Vash. The sole purpose of this group is to bring pain to Vesh and to finish him off after breaking him. While he does eventually end up defeating the assassins sent after him, his hesitation ends up costing the life of innocent civilians, and even though he spares his opponents, Legato and his lackeys end up executing them afterwards, making Vesh's efforts futile. A key character to the narrative that helps Vesh realize a better course of action is Nicholas D. Wolfwood. Wolfwood is a traveling priest that feels a strong urge to help those in need comparable to Vesh's. However, he takes a different approach, as he opts to kill his opponents without hesitation. As a way to atone for his sins, he runs an orphanage to keep innocent children from taking his path and save them from the harshness of life. Just like Vesh's gun, Wolfwood's weapon also symbolizes the contradictions of his character. On his back he carries a huge cross that conceals multiple guns. It is a tool that he uses for killing, but also to help those in need. It is quite literally a cross he has to bear to atone for his sins. Wolfwood's way of thinking is perfectly encapsulated in a quote from episode 23, where we get a flashback from his childhood in which his mentor, Chapel the Evergreen, states,
"Life is like an incessant series of problems, all so difficult, with brutal choices and a time limit. The single worst thing we can do is to make no choice while we're waiting for the answer to come to us. You must make the best decision in a split second. We are nothing like God. Not only are our powers limited, we sometimes are driven to become the devil himself."
Wolfwood ends up reprimanding Vesh multiple times by telling him that his methods won't work forever. Yet, despite his pragmatic mindset, he cannot help but be enthralled by Vesh's altruism and relentless belief in the goodness of others. That is why he often ends up playing by his rules when they are facing a common enemy. Wolfwood sees Vesh as a quasi-godlike being that should be held to higher moral standards, but he also believes that Vesh has a responsibility to use his power instead of concealing it. In episode 16, Vesh loses control of his power and with his gun creates a hole in the moon, after which he disappears for months. Later, in episode 18, we find out that he has been hiding under an alias and living with a small family, avoiding any kind of conflict, hoping to lead a normal life among humans. It is only when Wolfwood finally finds him and confronts him that Vesh is able to get himself back on track. The priest helps him realize that he has a responsibility to use his power and that running away from it will only bring more tragic consequences. Wolfwood returns Vesh's gun back to him, and by accepting it, Vesh once again recognizes that his power is an integral part of his being. Even though it has shown itself to be a destructive force, he must learn to embrace it so he can help others and create a better world. Wolfwood manages to inspire Vesh with his willingness to act for the greater good, but he also finds himself learning much from our protagonist. In the end, the pragmatic and disillusioned Wolfwood finds himself being swayed by Vesh's relentless idealism. In episode 23, Wolfwood defeats Chapel the Evergreen in a duel, but spares his life only for Legato to take control of Chapel's body and deliver a lethal blow to Wolfwood. In the end, Wolfwood could not follow Vesh's path as he was only a mere human, matching Vesh's altruism, but sadly lacking his power. Nonetheless, before dying, Wolfwood finds himself fully embracing Vesh's philosophy and repenting for his past sins. The gunslinging priest dies in a small church before an altar, still tightly holding his cross, having finally found redemption. The death of one of his closest friends makes Vesh's fate waver. The final straw that makes him question the validity of his moral code comes when Legato kidnaps his traveling companions Meryl and Millie, giving Vesh an ultimatum. Either he renounces his moral code and kills him, or two innocent people end up dying. With a trembling hand and tears in his eyes, Vesh realizes there is no other way to end this conflict, as he points his gun at Legato's head and finally pulls the trigger. Legato has thus accomplished his mission at the cost of his own life. Vesh has finally been forced to renounce Rem's ideals. he has killed a spider to save the butterfly. By killing Legato, Vesh feels as though he has betrayed Rem's legacy, and for that reason he is unable to face Knives. In his mind, he had become just like his brother. While recovering, Vesh takes refuge in a small village where Meryl and Millie help him to get back on his feet. But when the villagers find out his identity, they end up torturing him as revenge for the destruction he's brought. Just as Vesh is about to be shot by one of the villagers, Meryl steps in and shields him with her body. It is at that moment that Vesh realizes his efforts and commitment to pacifism weren't wasted, as throughout his journey he has managed to inspire countless people to follow his path and trust in the goodness of others, even if it means risking their own lives for the greater good. Maybe there really was a better way to stop Legato, or maybe killing him really was the only option. Either way, dwelling on the past won't help in creating a better future. The only way for Vesh to find redemption for his sins is to take action and confront his past head-on. With renewed determination, Vesh puts on his red coat again, picks up his gun and takes Wolfwood's cross on his shoulders, ready to finally confront Knives. During their final duel, Vesh goes toe-to-toe against Knives, but at one point gets knocked down and loses his gun. Just as Knives is about to deliver the final blow, Vesh hears Wolfwood's voice.
What are you doing, Needle Noggin? It's right next to you. Use it, damn it!
After knocking down Knives, Vesh regains his gun and shoots his brother's arms and legs. Vesh has thus finally embraced his power and decided not to hold back. With unwavering determination, he defeated Knives. After the final battle, Vesh throws away his gun and his red coat, symbolically rejecting the two moral extremes that were presented to him in his childhood. He no longer feels limited to following the paths that Rem and Knives laid out for him. He's free to find his own way. Although he has rejected Rem's idealistic pacifism, he still believes in the power of compassion. Therefore, he decides to spare Knives and apprehends him instead. Despite his grave sins, Vesh believes that Knives too can right the wrongs of his past and find redemption. At the end of Trigun, Vesh finds himself wandering an uncertain path towards the future. But one thing is certain in his mind: no one has to stay bound to the past. No one is beyond redemption.